Hello, everybody. Ronald Poon Realtor here. Today, we're going to be talking about the implications of buying a tenanted property in Ontario, the cons and risk. Let's get right into it. All right, so when you buy a tenanted property, so the seller is currently the landlord, right? You typically have to assume the tenant at their existing agreed upon lease price and other terms unless you are eligible to evict them to end their tenancy. The only way to do this is by a form called N12 from the Landlord Tenant Board. And you cannot serve an N12 unless a certain thing is true, which is that the purchaser has signed an agreement of purchase and sale with the current landlord, which is the seller, and one of the following people here will be moving into the unit. That includes the purchaser's spouse, their parents, the child, so basically their immediate family, or someone who will be providing care services. However, if the current tenant is in the middle of a 1 year lease, let's say halfway, N12 does not work. They have the right to stay at least 1 year. Additionally, you must give them at least 60-day notice. The current seller or whoever files the N12 must also give the tenant who must leave 1 month in compensation. Otherwise, this N12 is not valid. Just because an N12 has been filed, it does not mean the tenants have to leave. The tenants are legally allowed to stay past the 60-day notice period. The only way ever to get a tenant out is to force them out with the L forms from the Landlord Tenant Board, which costs money and can take up to 1 year. And the only way the tenants will actually have to leave is when there's a sheriff's order for them to leave. So the police will actually come and tell them to leave, otherwise, they're arrested. And to get to that point, you do need to win at the Landlord Tenant Board. They need to approve this sheriff's order, and it will take up to 1 year due to delays in the Ontario Landlord Tenant Board at this time. So it's extremely risky if you need to live somewhere because let's say you expect to move in 90 days, you can expect it can take up to 1 year. You could technically close with the tenants in it. However, if the tenants do not leave and you close with the tenants in it, you assume the responsibility of the tenant, which means if they don't pay rent, the seller doesn't owe you anything. You're responsible for going after the tenant for non-paid rent, and usually it costs too much in legal fees to go after a tenant in non-paid rent that most landlords just let it go. It's one of the risks of becoming a landlord in Ontario. The landlord tenant board will not help you if the tenant does not pay rent or damage the unit. You need to go through the small claims court. Additionally, it's better to buy a property that is vacant. That's the best. Owner occupied is second best because they move out very carefully. I'm not trying to insult tenants in general, but just generally because they don't own the property and maybe they're a little angry that they have to leave, they might damage the building a little more at closing. So let's say we do the showing, the property looks pretty good, but when the tenants on closing date, you'll see maybe that you're lucky the tenants actually leave before closing date, but it might be extremely damaged. So you don't really get what you pay for. But with a vacant property, on closing, you know that's exactly what you're getting. There's not going to be any more damage. Additionally, sometimes tenanted properties, hidden defects may be covered by their tenant's item. For example, if tenants have like a large scratch on the wall hidden behind a bookshelf, it may not be visible during showings. Or maybe there's a closet full of junk. And maybe after they move out, you see there's signs of flooding or another big hole in the wall of the closet. So now you have a headache because the seller will say, "Oh, I sold it as is," when you saw it, but you couldn't see it, right? So additionally, some people think tenanted properties are better deal, but it's not because a landlord with a tenant in the property is actually generating income right now, and maybe they're break even or maybe even cash flow positive a little bit depending on their mortgage and everything. As a result, these sellers are often not too motivated to sell the property at a low price. They might wait for a market rebound or wait for a higher offer. Meanwhile, a vacant property, actually, you're more likely to get a good deal because let's say maintenance fees are around $600 a month, property taxes 200, and then they're paying another like 700 in mortgage insurance. So every month they don't sell. I see a lot of sellers of vacant properties, they're actually bleeding like $2,000 per month. So let's say you put it in an offer of 500,000, but they want 510, right? But if they don't accept your offer in, let's say, 5 months, they need to accept an offer of 510 just to break even. So it's not even a better deal. I just want to disclaim that as a realtor, this is not my absolute expertise. I just know about it. You should check with a lawyer. But anyways, these are the end forms. They're just notices. The tenant can basically ignore them. They're not very powerful. It does not lead to a sheriff's order at all. Only after they've ignored your N form, which in this specific case for a buyer, N12, right? After they ignore it for a while, you would file a L form, which does cost money. In this specific case, if they ignore your N12, you would file Form L2. And in this form, you're going to say, I filed an N12, but they're not leaving because the purchaser needs to move in, right? Filing fee is 200, around $200 to file this form. And it does take a very long time. And meanwhile, I've seen many tenants get mad when these forms are being served and filed, and they just stop paying rent, wait for the police to come and leave. So that's one risk. I advise my buyers to basically never ever close on a property that currently has a tenant inside unless they're paying close to fair market value rent or above. And maybe you also check all their documents and you actually talk to them and make sure that you can connect with them. And you're not planning to move in the property, like you're buying this as an investment property. Please do note that when you buy a property as a rental, you do need at least 20% down as down payment. And secondly, your mortgage interest rate will be around 20 to 30 basis points higher. The reason for this is because the default rate for tenanted properties are usually a little bit higher because people will usually do whatever it takes to not get kicked out of their own home. But if they already own a property and like a principal residence and a tenant, they have another property as tenants and maybe they're just like, all right, whatever, I'll just let that one go and let the bank take it. The bank doesn't want to take it, first of all. That's not their business. They don't want you to default. Secondly, even when the bank takes possession for power of sale, if you don't pay the mortgage, they also need to deal with the tenants. So they might have to sell it in like 1 year, which the bank also does not want. Therefore, if you buy a property and you're not living there and you're buying a rental unit, the interest rate today is November 2025. The best owner occupied interest rate is around 3.8. But for rentals, it would be like 4.1. Just because there's that premium for all the cons for the lenders that I mentioned. Anyways, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Always nice to chat with you guys. If you guys have any questions about real estate in Toronto, just find me at the information that's about to roll. I'm always happy to help new clients. Take care, guys.